everybody to this week's webinar. This is in our Persona series. This is the live version of the Persona webinars that we're running. Absolutely delighted today to be joined by Deborah Rodgers, who's EMEA HRD for Nikon. So welcome, Deborah. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Emma, for having me. It's a pleasure today.
Excellent. Great. Thanks for joining us. So just a little reminder about how these webinars go. This is an opportunity for you to talk with a C-suite directly with the idea of understanding more about the C-suite role and also the things that are important to them and how you can get in their diary. So we do have longer webinars that are available on our platform, and we're lucky enough to have Deborah to record a webinar with us a few weeks ago. So there's a longer version of this if you want to access that through the platform. And there's also a blog and cheat sheet that accompany these webinars as well. So you can really get into that persona and understand how you can work with them to try and sell something to them and work with them, add some value to them. So the way that these webinars run is that today what we'll do is we'll talk through a couple of the key points, some of the interesting things that we talked about in the previous conversation, but then also it's your opportunity to ask questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can ask through the Q&A or ask through the chat. What we'll do is we'll probably talk for about 15 minutes if you pop your points in the chat and Q&A, and then we'll pick those up towards the end. Feel free to ask questions. It's important that we get some interaction from different people. That's how you get the benefit from these webinars. So great. So thanks very much for joining us, Deborah. So to kick off then, it'd be really good to get an understanding of what's your background, your experience, and what are some of those key roles that you've held in HR or in other roles within organisations?
Thank you, Emma, and hi to everyone who's joined today. My background, I have been in the people function for about 34 years, 30 years plus now, at various different levels, having joined at HR administrator and worked my way up through advisor, business partner. During some of the kind of earlier roles, I kind of dabbled in customer services when I was fortunate to work for a very large mobile phone company and did the customer service and site manager role for a little while, which gave me a fantastic insight to what our people were actually going through on a day-to-day basis that really helped, really for me, define what the strategy had to look like and what we had to do from a people function. So that was a fantastic opportunity for me at the time. I've worked across many different diverse companies, manufacturing, finance, customer services, engineering, to name a few. So I've had a very diverse background, which has really helped me in my role up until probably the last 12, 15 years, where I've been more senior business partner and an HR director for some of the large, very corporate companies. So it's been a very, I would say, very positive, and I've been very privileged to have been in some of the companies I've been in and work with some amazing, really amazing people on that journey. So that's my background, Emma.
Oh, that's great. Thanks very much for sharing that with us, Deborah. So one of the things that we talked about when we met last time on the pre-recording was we were discussing all of the different responsibilities that a HRD has, and particularly from our sales team's perspective, understanding the different types of roles so that we can go looking for those job titles and the different angles in to get into a CHRO or HRD. Be great just to recap on that, on some of the key responsibilities that you've had in the past and that you see, and some of those roles that would typically report into a CHRO.
I think, again, it depends on what organisation you're in. Is it a UK, an Ireland-based company? Is it an EMEA-based company, or is it more of a global company? And that really defines what the structure looks like in the people function, and again, what the volume of that company is also. But typically, what you would normally find, and what I've been fortunate enough to lead in the years in this role, is that there's typically about 6 key areas that we are really responsible for, and they have really evolved over time. If I go way back, we were really just in charge of kind of more administration. Nowadays, the CHRO role is very, very vast and very large, what we've got responsibility for. People don't think really understand about how commercial we have to be now within this role, and work very closely with the CFO. So all of my teams, I mean, if I look at some of them, we've got the pay and benefits, more of the kind of remuneration side of things, and how do we continually try and evolve those for our internal customers? Because as we all know on the call, pay and benefits are one of the most emotive pieces for any employee. So we have to get that right, and that's typically quite a large part of our department. We have got training development. We have a very heavy reliance on legal and compliance, usually within our roles as well as just having the HR business partners who have the front facing into our business as well. And from an HR operational perspective, we tend to have an HR ops team that sit with us who look at things like our data, our information systems, all of that kind of analysis that it drives some of the key decision making that I will make with the team. So it's very, very diverse what we've got now across all of that. And typically, you're looking probably about 30, 40 kind of employees that sit probably below me in a typical company of the sizes that I've worked in, and actually a lot more depending on how that's made up. So anything from training development, back office functions, from administration side, and then straight into the front facing, we're typically probably a lot of salespeople would work with to try and understand what it is we're trying to do from a strategy perspective that helps us do our jobs much more efficient as well.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I suppose, my very narrow view of HR, and I've actually not sold much into HR over my career. I've sold into other departments. I suppose some of the sort of macro level KPIs that I'd always considered were things like employee sat, things like retention, those types of things. But as you creep into some of those other areas that you mentioned around things like compensation, some of those ops challenges, what are the sorts of KPIs as a CHRO that you're tracking at a very macro level? What are the things that are really driving you? And then also, what are those sort of a lower level KPIs, those metrics that people might be sort of gathering to start building out a business case to invest in something?
Great question, Emma. And again, that has completely evolved as well. That has, and it used to be, let me probably start with the latter part of that conversation, because it's more around your typical absence, retention, roles, recruitment. How much is a role opened? How long does it take you to fill a role? Nowadays, that is much more really sought after, that we have got the right data to run our business. And that is more around, and if I take a couple of examples for you, in recruitment, it's more now about our DEI portfolio. How many women, how many men are applying for roles, how many get through first stage interview. And again, we go very deep on some of that analysis. And again, when we look at from a remuneration perspective, when we're looking to do a gender pay report, again, very, very vast, very varied data that we have to gather. Even just from the cost of living, we've gone through since the pandemic, we have to really focus now on every single penny that we spend as a business. But where do we put our money and where do we put our resources, whether it's internally or external? And that is so important now for me in my role to be that commercially focused, to look at some of these KPIs. And again, we go into a lot of details, things like the efficiency programme at the moment, when we look at how fast technology is changing. The pack that I've got now has probably got about 30 KPIs plus more. When I look at this with my CFO and my CEOs, and that really dives really deep into how many people are training, what's the return on investment in the training, how many people are actually getting recruited internally versus externally. So as much as the basic has still to be there from an absence, retention, engagement perspective, one of the big key focuses we've been looking at in the last couple of years, and again probably since the pandemic, has been about our health and wellbeing for our employees. How much money do we spend on that? How much can we support our employees? And then that goes even further, Emma, that goes into things like, can we work more flexibly together? What is the assets that we've got? How can we put some of that money back to the employee? But we have to have all that data to back some of these decisions up. So when we used to look at maybe 5 KPIs, we're now looking at 30 plus KPIs as from a people function at the moment. So it's very, very vast.
Yeah. And just on that, I'm just curious about that well-being point, because we work with a lot of sales teams who are obviously trying to convey really hard benefits in terms of value to establish a return on investment. It'd be great to just get your perspective on something like well-being, because I mean, how easy is it to look at cause and effect there around some of those things? Like, if we offer more flexible working, does that mean that, I mean, maybe from a lagging indicator, absenteeism may well improve, but how do you justify that? Or is there, from a HR perspective, a little bit of a leap of faith around how much you should be spending on these sorts of things?
Again, it's a very mix of both, Emma. Typically, in our organisations, we'll work with public external providers from one of the big names in healthcare. But what we've got to look at also is exactly the absence. What are the reasons? What are the rationale for the absences? How long are people off, and how much is that really costing the business? And as part of the business case for the wellbeing, sometimes it is a leap of faith, and you've got to think about it sometimes as how much or how long is it going to take us to see a benefit when we have to spend some money. And part of the business case that I'd be looking to those providers for is to say, is it a 3-year programme or is it a 5-year programme, of actually looking at how much I spend up front, of actually how much I'm going to get that back. And this is about just making sure that we've got employees supported. Most companies have got employee assistance programmes, but other things that we can put in place. In the company that I just left, we put a lot of, it's not even about the money, it's about actually putting that support in place for our employees. But we have to have that data that drives that back. And this is about actually saying, can we provide courses for our employees to understand how they can support each other? And it always goes back to that whole management line, Emma, where we try to upskill managers. It's about putting things in place to help managers spot wellbeing, making sure that the employees are supported. But we need that data from an HR perspective to say, are we putting our money in the right places? So for a provider that comes in from a wellbeing perspective, they have to be able to provide me with the data that says, oh, 25 people called the helpline this week. This is what it's regarding. Very much confidential, but we just have to have those numbers to say, right, is this working for us? Is it supporting? And actually, are we starting to see a trend from an absence perspective, or is it a different absence perspective? And again, that's where our HR systems and having those conversations with individuals. And again, it comes back to making sure our managers are equipped and trained and we have the right tools to support our managers. So again, it's much more those systems pieces as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. And yeah, it's interesting because I suppose the lagging indicators is the absenteeism, but the leading indicators on that is it may just be behavioural. It may be that you're not necessarily fully seeing an issue, but if you've got things like manager reporting it, or there's some calls into a helpline or those sorts of things, then there's some of those leading indicators that are within there.
Yeah,
okay.
there is.
So one of the conversations we also had, and if anybody's got any questions for Deborah, please feel free to pop them into the chat. The other question that we had, we talked about when we spoke before, was about sort of ongoing people strategy, and just really interested to get your view on AI and on HR's approach to AI and some of the areas that you've sort of been exploring in there, because this is something that everybody's now selling to, and obviously there is a human impact on AI as well. So just looking to get your perspective on the HR's perspective there.
Again, I think some of my professional people would say it's probably quite a new thing for us, but it's not. It's something we've been looking at probably for probably 5-10 years in the HR world. And it's more around, I'll give you an example of a company I worked in before, where we just literally stripped back all of the administration, all of those processes, all of those touch points, all of those policies, procedures, perspective, where are all the inefficiencies lying? Now you can do, I've met some great COOs in my time who do really fantastic customer journey maps. I've done them internally to look at where do those pain points we've got from an inefficiencies perspective, and what systems or what new benefit platform can we build in to navigate and take out some of those inefficiencies. And administration is one of the biggest parts that we can really look at from an AI perspective to really help us drive some of that. But this is to make sure then that we are equipping the kind of HR administrators to go to that next level. There's lots of work in the HR forum that we never get to touch, Emma, because we're always so busy in the weeds sometimes. And I think for AI, it can be a very positive thing for us to look at these inefficiencies to say, right, okay, where do we want to spend our money? So where's the biggest bang for our buck? But it frees us up then to go and look at the real crux of the organisation that we need to look at. And that's kind of where we typically look at what are the skills, where are the inefficiencies lying. And again, that really kind of tends to start from the kind of administration side as we work through that with our HR operational teams. And then look at the kind of benefits platform. We do want to make sure that we can put as much manager self-service and employee self-service into a company. Again, it depends on the size and the magnitude of a company, but making sure that people can self-service as well from anywhere, any location, anywhere they can. And we have to make sure as a people function, we're giving our internal customers the ability to transact with us really from anywhere. And that's part of the AI model that really, really kind of excites me, Emma, that we can do more from more remote places.
So one of the things you talked about there, Deborah, interestingly, is about HR looking at AI as the opportunity, essentially. So, and we just had a question come into the chat here around this. So, whereas you're looking at it sort of, HR out, if you like, you're looking for those efficiencies. But I wonder also about your perspective around when vendors are working with the business and because certainly I've done this throughout my career. Oh, there's some inefficiencies here. Look, we can take out 5 people. Let's build a business case to go and do that. It's interesting, as we again talked about this a little bit before around the impact of that onto HR and onto the people. So it'd be great to get your view on these productivity-based business cases and the reality of swapping people out for AI.
That's a fabulous question, Emma. And for me, I think I can honestly say this because I've done this on many occasions. When we're writing business cases, the last thing that I tend to look at is the people. Because what I have found in the past is that if you can put down this X, Y, and Z will save you 10 people, that is never the case, right? It's just never the case. Because what you will find is you'll end up finding a different home for people. And as we look at the different skill set over the next probably 5-10 years as well, what I would say from a professional advice perspective is look at the roles, not the people. Look at the roles that you have before you make those final decisions. And what I would say is sometimes you overestimate the savings because you're trying to get a business case in there. Look at other avenues before you look at your people, because there's always more fat in an organisation than what you really think. So I think if anybody takes anything away today, it's about look at the productivity, look at other inefficiencies across the organisation, look at the roles, look how they're set up. I talk about things when we do change management, about rearranging the deck chairs, but it is about trying to find other homes, upskilling individuals to take other roles in the organisation. But really look at that, really at the resourcing side of it as a kind of final part of any business case.
Yeah, and we see this a lot from CFOs. Our next webinar that we're doing in 2 weeks' time is 1st November. So we're interviewing Steve Mitchell, who's the CFO of Redgate. And one of the things that Steve talked to us about this week was also when you go down that productivity road, the CFO, has now cottoned on to these great business cases that whip out people, and they want the names in the frames. So actually, what are the who are the people individually that we're talking about removing here? And most people don't want to get down to that sort of level, because people will find other things to do. There's always other priorities as well. Okay, so another question that we've had come into the chat then. So to what extent is workforce planning and organisation and design a priority? And where can HR complement FP&A and finance to sort of with that strategic planning? Now, actually, this is something we did talk about a little bit on the previous point, but it'd be great to get your view there around workforce planning and how involved you get within that.
Great question. Again, so for workforce planning, it's really key as part of my role and as part of the wider team. When I sit down with a senior leadership team, we discuss it, and it's part of what you would typically call, and probably going back to some of that succession planning times, when we look at succession planning, workforce planning, the headcount plan. I can honestly say that I could never do this without my CFO partners and my finance business partners, because we have to work hand in hand. Any great CEO will look at both their CHRO and their CFO and say, right, you both have to be aligned in this. So it's really key that our relationship is absolutely aligned on that workforce planning. It's key. You tend to look at it about 3 years in advance, maybe sometimes more, but we all know that businesses can change overnight, and we've all worked in those businesses. Workforce planning is really a key fundamental part with the business and with my senior leadership team and my CFO partners, because they have to budget, they have to accrue, they have to make all of these sacrifices as we go through, and then we have to understand, where do we take the money from? And I think one of the things, if anyone is coming to sell me a technology product or anything, Emma, they have to probably just remember as well that HR is not a money-making department, right? We have a budget, but we don't actually make money. What we do is we try and protect the business from any risk in compliance, and we try and make money through inefficiencies and really help managers drive a higher performance. So it's really key that when we're looking at all of these things for workforce planning, the HR have got a seat at the table, and we're really typically, I would say, the custodians with our CFO partners on what that workforce plan looks like for the next year, 2, 3 years. So it's extremely important.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. So I got loads of points in there that I could pick up on. But the one that I'm going to go to first is the I've always generally had this view around sort of HR and IT to a certain extent, is that you are service providers within the organisation. Other people are driving the agenda, driving the conveyor belt, if you like. Just on that workforce planning, for those of us that aren't, really familiar with that particular process that you go through, I mean, so you have got a 3-year lens that you're looking at there, and it sounds like there's a lot of forward thinking that's required. What are some of the challenges that you face sort of in that process? Because that sounds like it's almost a little bit behind the magic curtain, really, how you sort of do the workforce planning. How does that work?
And that's probably a great way to describe it, Emma. It really is. We know that plan is fluid. Again, it depends on what your product is as a business. Have you got sales forecasted? So do we know that we're going to have money coming into the business? And that part of it drives what we're looking at. How much business have we acquired? Do we have a solid plan to sell in the next 3 years? Again, it all depends on your product. But that is part of the driver with the CFO, and that's why it's so key to understand what are all those moving parts within a business. But like we all know on the call, anything can happen in the business. We can have a financial crash, we can have a pandemic, we can have lots of things that come left field. But it's about being able to tweak that plan, that workforce plan, if we need to. And unfortunately, as we've gone through, and definitely as I've gone through the last 30 years, we've had to tweak those plans very quickly, depending on the financial circumstances of a business. And that does lead you to actually quickly pivot to almost that emergency meeting that says, right, okay, so where are the roles, where are the parts of the business that we might not need going forward, or what actual products, or do we have to sell more? And this is where it's really key to have the kind of senior leadership team together across that table to make sure that we're making those decisions together as a business, because I might be able to give up something, but my sales force might be able to add something. So it's about really working, that communication is really, really key, and that planning piece is extremely, extremely important. But each of the heads of department really have to be working together in a business that really knows what we're doing in the next probably couple of months.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really great. Thanks very much for answering that one. And then I suppose one just final question from me then. I think it's more of just a curiosity from me. We talked a little bit about this before as well, but I'm always really interested in compensation planning as well, as I suppose as an art more than a science. We always have a little bit of a chuckle, certainly in the organisations that I've been in, where from a CFO's perspective, obviously they're very keen to make sure that compensation planning is lean. But also, particularly when you're in a situation, I suppose, with like many of our sort of sales colleagues that we're working with, is actually a sign of compensation spend is a sign of, success within the business. So often there's a big balance there in compensation planning. What are some of the key challenges that you see around sort of compensation and benefits? What are the things that are hot on a CHRO's agenda?
I think over the last few years, there's definitely been much more pressure on us when we're looking at the cost of living rises. And again, that's probably not been forecast before the last 5 years to really get to drive it. And as we know, CPI has been quite high, etc. And for me, that's one of the issues that we've got is, and again, this is why it's really key working with our CFO. There is a plan there, but I've maybe gone back and said, look, you've budgeted for 3%, we need to give 6.5%, it's the living wage now, or we need to really increase that as 10%. It's working really key with what can we do from a fixed or a variable pay. And I think we've seen this over the last few years. It's about going with that business case to say, I need, right? So I literally am like, I need X amount of money to be able to give all of our people a cost of living payment, a one-off payment, because what we have to look at is we don't want everything as a fixed remuneration on people's salaries. So what can we do that doesn't have to always remain as part of the salary? But what can we give as an additional payment to people? And what we typically find is when I've gone to my CFOs, they're like, well, there's no money. You haven't budgeted for this. And a lot of the time it'll come back to ourselves to say, well, find the money. What are you going to give up that can get us that money for the business? Now, typically you'll find that a lot of our departments will we'll all try and fill that gap together, but not always. And then that's when I do have to look at actually my plan from a people strategy over the next 3 years. It may have been that I wanted to invest in a bolt on to my HRIS system, but I'm not going to be able to do that because I can't afford it. And I do have to pay some of that gap from a remuneration perspective. And it's about balancing the books again to get us where we need to be, because at the end of the day, we have to do the right thing by our people during some of these situations. But it is a lot about give and take. And when I do have salespeople come in and saying, oh, I can give you X, Y, and Z, it's like, okay, so what's the return on investment? How much is it going to cost me up front? But what is it going to give me? And over the last couple of years that I have found is that we have to make some really quick decisions and really quick wins to get us to a place that's sustainable for our businesses. And that's the kind of key thing with some of the vendors. It's about you need to be able to show me what you've got and what you've got now, and actually how is that going to benefit me in the very short term. I hope now, as we hopefully go through the next 5 years, things will not be as frantic financially, and we can get to a place again that we can do a lot better of the cost modelling, that we don't have to just keep switching things back and forth.
Yeah, that's great. And I know Steve talked about this on the webinar, that pre-recording that we did with Steve as well, which, he was talking about those no-brainer decisions where you can do an instant swap out. It makes the right,
Yep.
it makes the decision easier to do that. But then obviously there's some other things in business cases that require a bit more of a leap of faith or more creativity around doing that. It was an amazing conversation. Thanks so much, Deborah. Unfortunately, we're out of
Thank
time
you.
for today. If anybody's got any feedback from the webinar, then please do come back to us and let us know. If there's something like you'd like to hear for the future, certainly come back to us and do let us know. The next webinars that we're going to be running on the 1st of November, we're going to be talking to Steve Mitchell from Redgate, who's the CFO from Redgate. We'll also be talking to Jason Andrew on the 22nd of November in the afternoon slot for the US, and he is CRO of Trellix. And then on the 29th, we'll be talking to Emma Clayton, who is a CMO, serial CMO, who's been working with a number of different AI companies. So hopefully we'll see you all then. And thanks so much, Deborah, for joining us today. It's been really great to hear your insights and just learn more about the world of HR. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for asking. Thank you, Emma.
Amazing. That's great. Thanks very much, Deborah.